There's a particular kind of exhaustion you feel when life falls apart. Not the tiredness that sleep can cure, but a bone-deep weariness that settles in when everything you built comes crumbling down. Maybe it was the career that defined you for decades, suddenly gone. Maybe it was the marriage you thought would last forever, now ending in silence. Or perhaps it's the body you once trusted, now betraying you with pain or illness that won't relent. And in those moments, when you're sitting alone in the quiet of your home, perhaps with a cup of tea growing cold on the table beside you, a question rises that you can barely whisper aloud. What now? Who am I when everything I thought I was has disappeared? I've sat with countless people asking this question. I've seen it in their eyes during meditation retreats, heard it in their voices during quiet conversations after Dharma talks. And each time, I recognize it as a sacred moment, though it rarely feels sacred when you're living through it. It feels more like drowning. But here's what I want you to understand right from the beginning. This question, raw and aching as it is not a sign of weakness. It's not evidence that you've failed. In fact, from a Buddhist perspective, it's the most important question you may ever ask. Because suffering, the Buddha taught, is not a mistake. It's not punishment. It's not even primarily about what happened to you. Suffering is a teacher, and if you're willing to listen, to really listen, it will show you something profound about the nature of existence itself, and more importantly, about the freedom that's been waiting for you all along. The Buddha himself came to this realization through suffering. As a young prince named Siddhartha, he was sheltered from all pain, surrounded by every comfort imaginable. But when he finally ventured outside the palace walls, he encountered what Buddhists call the four sights: an old person, a sick person, a corpse, and a wandering monk seeking truth. These encounters shook him to his core. He realized that no amount of wealth or pleasure could protect him, or anyone, from aging, illness, and death. This realization led him to leave everything behind, to spend years searching for an answer to the question of suffering. And when he finally sat beneath the Bodhi tree and vowed not to rise until he understood, what he discovered changed everything. He saw that suffering exists, yes, but more importantly, he saw why it exists, and he saw the path to freedom from it. The Buddha's first teaching after his enlightenment wasn't about happiness or peace, it was about suffering. He gathered 5 seekers in the deer park at Sarnath and spoke what would become known as the Four Noble Truths. And the first truth he spoke was this: there is suffering in life. Not life is only suffering, as some mistakenly believe, but that suffering, what the Buddha called dukkha, is woven into the very fabric of human existence. This might sound depressing at first, but stay with me, because what the Buddha understood, what he wanted us to see, is that acknowledging suffering is not pessimism, it's honesty. It's the beginning of wisdom. You see, dukkha means more than just physical pain or emotional anguish. It encompasses a deeper sense of unsatisfactoriness, a recognition that nothing in this changing world can ever provide permanent security or lasting happiness. Birth brings suffering, aging brings suffering, illness brings suffering, death brings suffering, separation from what we love brings suffering, contact with what we dislike brings suffering, not getting what we want brings suffering. These are not personal failures. These are the conditions of being alive. The Buddha said this not to make us despair, but to wake us up, because as long as we believe that suffering is abnormal, as long as we think this shouldn't be happening to me, we add a second layer of pain on top of the first. We shoot ourselves, as the Buddha described it, with a second arrow. The first arrow is the event itself, the loss, the pain, the unwanted change. The second arrow is our resistance to it, Our story about how wrong it is, how unfair, how it means we've been abandoned by life itself. But here's what changes everything. When you stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What is this teaching me?" Suffering transforms. Not immediately, not without effort, but gradually, steadily, as you learn to meet your pain with awareness instead of resistance, something shifts. Let me tell you about a woman named Margaret. I met at a meditation retreat several years ago. She was 73, newly widowed after 50 years of marriage. Her husband's death had been sudden, a heart attack that took him before the ambulance arrived. When I first saw her, she was sitting alone on a bench, staring at nothing, her face carved with a grief so deep it seemed to have aged her another decade. On the third day of the retreat, during a small group discussion, she spoke. "I thought I knew who I was," she said quietly. "John's wife, the woman who made his favorite soup every Sunday, the one who laughed at his terrible jokes. But now, without him, I don't know. I wake up and for a moment I forget he's gone, and then I remember, and it's like drowning all over again." She paused, and tears rolled down her weathered cheeks. But something strange is happening. In the silence, in the meditation, I'm starting to see something. All those years, I wasn't just John's wife. I was also the one who held the grief, the one who felt the love, the one who noticed the sun coming through the window each morning. I'm still here. Somehow, I'm still here. Margaret had stumbled onto the second noble truth without knowing it. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from craving and clinging. But what exactly are we clinging to? We cling to identities, to roles, to the belief that we are a fixed, permanent self that can be threatened or diminished. We attach ourselves to, "I am this, I must have that, this is mine." And when life inevitably changes, when the thing we identified with disappears, we feel as though we ourselves are disappearing. Think about all the roles you've played in your life: parent, spouse, professional, perhaps caregiver to aging parents, or breadwinner, or the strong one everyone relied on. These roles felt solid, didn't they? They felt like who you were, not just what you did. But what happens when your children grow up and move away? When retirement comes and that professional identity vanishes? When the person you cared for passes on, or your strength begins to fade? Suddenly, you're left with a question that feels like standing on the edge of a cliff. If I'm not these things anymore, then who am I? The Buddha understood this deeply. He called it tanha, this craving, this thirst for life to be a certain way. And he taught that tanha comes in three forms. There's craving for sensual pleasures, for comfort and enjoyment. There's craving for existence, for life to continue in the form we want. And there's craving for non-existence, sometimes expressed as a wish to escape, to disappear, to not have to feel what we're feeling. All three arise from the same root: the belief in a separate, permanent self that needs protecting, that needs satisfying, that can be threatened. But here's where it gets interesting. When we believe we are this fixed self, we're like someone who looks in a mirror and forgets they're looking at a reflection. We take the image to be reality itself. A Buddhist teacher once used this analogy. Imagine you're watching a movie, and you become so absorbed in the story that you forget you're sitting in a theater. You feel fear when the character is threatened, joy when they triumph, sadness when they lose. But then someone taps you on the shoulder and you remember, "Oh, I'm watching a movie. This isn't happening to me." The emotions were real, the experience was real, but the belief that you were the character, that was the illusion. This is what the Buddha meant when he spoke of anatta, non-self. He wasn't saying you don't exist. He was saying you exist differently than you think. You're not a fixed thing, a permanent essence that stays the same from birth to death. You're a process, constantly changing, constantly flowing, like a river that's never the same water twice, yet we still call it a river. But the Buddha asked us to look more closely. What is this self we're so desperately protecting? When we examine it, really examine it with patient attention, we find something startling. There's no solid, unchanging essence to grasp. What we call self is actually a flowing river of sensations, thoughts, feelings, memories, all constantly changing, arising and passing away moment by moment. This teaching, what Buddhists call anatta or non-self, might sound frightening at first. If there's no permanent self, then who am I? But this is not nihilism. It's not saying you don't exist. It's saying you exist differently than you thought. You exist as a process, not a fixed thing. You exist as awareness itself, witnessing the constant dance of change. And here's the radical freedom in this. If there's no fixed self, then there's nothing that can truly be destroyed. When a role ends, when an identity dissolves, what remains is the awareness that was there all along, watching, experiencing, being present to life. The pain doesn't come from the change itself. It comes from clinging to what cannot stay the same. Think about the ocean and the waves. Each wave rises, crests, and falls back into the sea. If a wave believed it was separate from the ocean, if it clung to being this particular wave, it would suffer terribly as it crashed onto the shore. But a wave that knows itself as ocean water taking temporary form doesn't suffer the same way. It rises and falls as part of the great flow, never truly lost, never truly separate. This is why the Buddha taught that staying with our suffering, really feeling it without trying to escape or fix it immediately, is so essential. Not because we're masochists, not because pain is virtuous, but because only by meeting our suffering with clear awareness can we see what's actually happening underneath. There's a practice in Buddhism, found in the ancient text called the Satipatthana Sutta, that teaches us to observe 4 foundations of awareness: the body, feelings, the mind, and mental qualities. It's a way of staying present with whatever arises, without judgment, without trying to change it. The Buddha called this practice the direct path, not a winding road with many detours, but a straight path to freedom from suffering. And it begins with something remarkably simple: paying attention. When grief comes, you don't push it away or tell yourself you shouldn't feel this way. You notice there is grief. Not "I am grieving," which makes the grief seem like your identity, but there is grief which acknowledges the experience while maintaining a little space around it. You feel where it lives in your body. Maybe it's tightness in the chest, like a fist clenched around your heart. Maybe it's heaviness in the limbs, as though gravity itself has doubled. Maybe it's a hollowness in your stomach, or tension in your jaw. And then you do something radical. You stay with it. Not forever, just for this breath. And then the next one, and the next. You notice the quality of the feeling. Is it sharp like a knife, or dull like an ache? Is it constant, or does it come in waves? And most importantly, you watch as it changes, because it always changes. No emotion, no matter how overwhelming, stays at the same intensity forever. This might sound simple, but I'll be honest with you, it's not easy. Every instinct you have will tell you to run, to distract yourself, to make the pain stop. You'll want to turn on the television, call someone, eat something, anything to escape the rawness of what you're feeling. But here's what I've learned from years of practice and from watching others walk this path. Running from pain doesn't make it go away. It just makes it chase you, like a shadow that grows longer the faster you run from the light. This is not suppression. It's not spiritual bypassing where you paste on a smile and pretend everything's fine. It's the opposite. It's turning toward your suffering with such complete attention, with such gentleness, that you begin to see its nature clearly. And in that seeing, something loosens. Let me share a technique that many find helpful. When a difficult emotion arises, place your hand on your heart. Feel the warmth of your palm against your chest. Then whisper these words, adapted from the Buddhist practice of metta. This is suffering. Suffering is part of life. May I be gentle with myself. May I give myself the compassion I need. The Buddha taught that we can learn to be with our pain in a way that doesn't add unnecessary suffering on top. The pain itself, what he called the first arrow, may be unavoidable. But the second arrow, the judgment, the resistance, the story we tell about how wrong this is, that's optional. And learning to set down that second arrow is the heart of the practice. There's an old Buddhist parable about a woman named Kisa Gotami. Her young son died suddenly, and in her grief, she carried his body from house to house, begging for medicine that could bring him back to life. Finally, someone directed her to the Buddha. She placed her dead child at his feet and pleaded for help. The Buddha looked at her with great compassion and said, "I can help you. But first, you must bring me a mustard seed from a household that has never known death." Grateful, Kisa Gotami went from door to door throughout the village. But at every house, when she asked if they had experienced death, the answer was the same. "Yes, I lost my father. My sister died last year. My husband is gone." Every single household had known loss. By the time the sun set, Kisa Gotami had not found a single mustard seed, but something in her had shifted. She returned to the Buddha and said, "I understand now. I am not alone in this. Death comes to all. My suffering is not unique. It's part of being human." The Buddha nodded gently. "Yes. Now you see the first truth, and because you see it clearly, you can begin to release the second arrow, the belief that this loss should not have happened, that you alone carry this burden." This story holds a key insight. Suffering loses some of its power when we stop taking it personally. Not because the pain isn't real, it is, but because we see that pain, loss, and change are not targeting us specifically. They're part of the shared human condition. Everyone you've ever known will experience loss. Everyone will age. Everyone will face illness. Everyone will die. This isn't pessimism. This is the truth that, once accepted, becomes strangely comforting. You're not being singled out. You're simply alive. Now, let's talk about emotions, because this is where many of us get stuck. When anger arises, or fear, or deep sadness, our instinct is often to do one of two things. Either we get completely lost in the emotion, identifying with it, "I am angry, I am afraid," or we try to push it away, to numb it with distraction or substances or endless activity. But the Buddha taught a middle path. He said, "When anger is present, know clearly, there is anger. When fear is present, know clearly, there is fear." This subtle shift from "I am angry" to "there is anger" creates a space between you and the emotion. You're no longer the anger itself. You're the awareness that notices anger has arisen. Think about it this way. When you look out your window and see rain falling, you don't say, "I am raining." You say, "It is raining." The rain is something you observe, not something you become. Emotions can be seen the same way. They arise based on conditions, just like weather patterns. A thought triggers a memory triggers a feeling, and suddenly anger or sadness is present. But it's weather moving through, not your essential nature. And here's what happens when you practice this. When you create that little bit of space, you begin to see that emotions are not commands, they're signals, they're information. Anger might be telling you that a boundary was crossed. Fear might be signaling that you need to pay attention to something. Sadness might be the heart's way of honoring a loss. But you don't have to obey every signal. You can feel anger without acting from anger. You can notice fear without being controlled by fear. A Buddhist teacher I once studied with used to say, "Emotions are like weather patterns moving through the sky of awareness. You are not the storm. You are the sky." This is the teaching of anatta, of non-self, working at the most practical level. When you realize that thoughts arise and pass, emotions arise and pass, sensations arise and pass, all without a fixed you controlling them or being defined by them, a profound freedom opens up. Let me tell you about a man named Robert, 78 years old, who came to meditation practice after his diagnosis with Parkinson's disease. He was terrified, consumed by fear about losing control of his body, about becoming a burden to his family. "I keep thinking about the future," he told me, "about all the things I won't be able to do. And the fear is crushing me." We worked together on a simple practice. Every time fear arose, he would stop and ask himself, "Is fear present right now? Yes. Okay. Where do I feel it? What sensations are in my body this moment? And then, am I okay right this second? Not tomorrow, not next year, but right now in this breath. Am I okay?" The answer, almost always, was yes. In that exact moment, sitting in his chair, breathing in and out, he was okay. The suffering wasn't coming from the present moment. It was coming from his thoughts about the future, from mentally rehearsing scenarios that hadn't happened and might never happen. Over time, Robert learned something profound. He learned that he could have fear without being fear. He could notice the tremor in his hand without making it mean my life is over. He could be present with his actual experience rather than lost in stories about what it all meant. This doesn't mean he stopped feeling fear entirely. That would be inhuman. But the fear no longer consumed him. It became one weather pattern among many, and he learned to find stability in the awareness that held it all. This brings us to one of the most powerful aspects of the Buddha's teaching. Failure, rejection, and loneliness are not obstacles to awakening. They are gateways. Think about that for a moment. The times when you feel most alone, most rejected, most like a failure. These are exactly the moments when the ego weakens, when all those carefully constructed ideas about who you are start to crumble. And yes, this feels terrible. There's no way around it. But in that terrible feeling, in that rawness, there's also an opening. Because when all your achievements and identities fall away, what remains? What's still there when you can no longer say, "I am successful," or "I am needed," or "I am important"? What remains is the simple fact of being aware, of being alive, of breathing in and breathing out, of the sun still rising each morning, of the capacity to notice a bird outside your window, to taste your tea, to feel the ground beneath your feet. A Buddhist monk I knew once said, "The spiritual path is not about becoming a better person. It's about becoming less of a person, less identified with the masks and roles, until what remains is just pure presence, just this aware aliveness that was here before any identity formed and will be here when all identities dissolve." This doesn't mean you stop caring about things or stop engaging with life. It means you engage more freely, more lightly, without the heavy burden of needing everything to go a certain way to prove your worth. The Buddha's path, what he called the Noble Eightfold Path, is not about perfection. It's about practice. It's about making small, steady adjustments in how you live, how you speak, how you work, how you pay attention. It's right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Each of these is a tool for reducing suffering. Not someone else's suffering first, but your own. Because you cannot genuinely help others while you're drowning in your own unexamined pain. This isn't selfish. It's like putting on your own oxygen mask first on an airplane. You have to breathe clearly yourself before you can help anyone else breathe. Right effort, for instance, doesn't mean forcing yourself to be positive or to achieve more. It means having the wisdom to know what to develop and what to let go of. It means noticing when grasping arises and gently releasing it. Noticing when aversion arises and softening around it. Noticing when you're lost in stories about the past or anxious fantasies about the future, and coming back to what's actually happening right now. And right now is always workable, even when it's painful, even when it's not what you wanted, because right now is the only place where you actually have any power. The past is gone. The future hasn't arrived. This breath, this moment, this is where life is actually happening. There's another profound teaching in Buddhism about expectations. We suffer so much from our expectations, from demanding that life conform to our preferences. We want comfort, security, recognition, love, and when we don't get these things, or when we get them and then lose them, we suffer. But the Buddha asked, what if we loosened our grip on how we think things should be? What if we met life as it actually is, not as we wish it were? This doesn't mean becoming passive or giving up. It means acting wholeheartedly in each moment while not demanding that the outcome match your desires. You still care. You still try. But you stop tying your peace to results you cannot control. Imagine planting a garden. You prepare the soil carefully. You choose good seeds. You water and tend the plants. But you cannot control the weather. You cannot control whether birds eat some of the seeds. You cannot control every variable. What you can control is your effort, your care, your showing up day after day to do what's needed. The same is true with life. You can act with wisdom and compassion. You can make the best choices you know how to make, but you cannot control the outcome. And clinging to a specific outcome, demanding that life deliver what you want exactly when you want it, this is a recipe for endless frustration. Letting go of expectations doesn't mean not caring. It means caring so much that you're willing to do what's right, regardless of the result. It means your peace is not held hostage by circumstances beyond your control. Now, I want to speak directly to something many people your age face: the feeling that it's too late to change, too late to heal, too late to find peace. If you're carrying this belief, please hear this clearly: it is never too late. The Buddha welcomed students of all ages. Some of his most profound disciples came to him late in life, and the teaching is the same whether you're 20 or 70. Suffering comes from clinging to what changes, from identifying with what is not permanent, and liberation comes from seeing this clearly and releasing the grip. Every single breath is a new beginning. Every moment is a chance to meet life differently. Not by changing the past, you can't do that, but by changing your relationship to what is here now. Silence and stillness are not passivity, they're power. In the stillness of meditation, in the quiet moments when you're not filling every second with noise and distraction, the mind begins to settle. And in that settling, you start to see clearly. You see the patterns of thought that keep you suffering. You see the stories you tell yourself that aren't true. You see the ways you grasp and cling. And gradually, slowly, with patient practice, you learn to release. Not because someone told you to, not because you're trying to be spiritual, but because you directly see that grasping causes suffering and releasing brings peace. The Buddha's final teaching to his disciples was this: be a lamp unto yourself. Don't wait for someone else to save you. Don't look for happiness in external circumstances. Look within. Cultivate awareness, develop wisdom, practice compassion, because no one can do this work for you. Suffering will come. This is the first truth. It comes to everyone. But suffering doesn't have to destroy you. It doesn't have to be the end of your story. Because suffering, when met with awareness and wisdom, becomes the very thing that wakes you up. When you lose the identity you clung to, when the role disappears, when everything you thought you needed falls away, what remains is what was always there. Awareness itself, presence itself, the simple fact of being alive and conscious. And in that awareness, there's a profound peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. Not because nothing hurts anymore, but because you're no longer fighting with reality. You're no longer demanding that life be different than it is. You meet each moment, pleasant or unpleasant, with the same clear attention. This is what the Buddha meant when he spoke of nirvana, of liberation. It's not a place you go to after death. It's a way of being here and now, free from the constant craving and clinging that creates suffering. It's the cooling of the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. It's the profound relief of finally putting down the burden you've been carrying all these years. The burden of trying to be someone fixed and permanent in a world that is constantly changing. You don't have to wait until you're perfect to experience this. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to be willing to look honestly at your suffering, to stay with it long enough to see what's underneath, and to gradually, patiently, learn to let go of the clinging that keeps you trapped. The rebuilding that happens through this process is not about reconstructing the old version of yourself. It's about discovering what you are when all the constructions fall away. And what you are is something much more vast, much more free, much more at peace than any identity could ever be. So, if you're in pain right now, if life has stripped away everything you thought defined you, know this: you're not broken. You're breaking open. And in that opening, if you're willing to look, if you're willing to sit with the discomfort without running away, you'll find something you've been searching for your whole life. You'll find that peace is not something you have to earn or achieve. It's what remains when you stop fighting, stop grasping, stop demanding that this moment be anything other than what it is. This is the gift hidden in suffering. Not the suffering itself, but what it can teach you if you're willing to learn. It can teach you that you are not who you thought you were. You are not your accomplishments or your failures, your roles or your possessions, your past or your fears about the future. You are the awareness that witnesses all of these things arising and passing. And that awareness, that simple presence, is indestructible. It cannot be diminished by loss. It cannot be threatened by change. It is, as the Buddha discovered sitting under that tree 2,500 years ago, the only refuge that never fails. May you find the courage to turn toward your suffering with gentleness. May you discover the freedom that waits on the other side of clinging. And may you know, in your bones, that you are held by something much larger than any small self could ever be. The path is here. The teaching is available. Your life, exactly as it is right now, is the perfect place to begin.